Here now to discuss the problem of Islamophobia and why Donald Trump's rhetoric is so harmful in today's politics is Dr. Arun Kundnani, lecturer at New York University, writer on issues of race, Islamophobia, political violence, and surveillance, and author. His latest book, The Muslims Are Coming, Islamophobia, Extremism, and the Domestic War on Terror. Dr. Kundnani, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Tom.
Thanks for joining us. Is this type of Islamophobia new in America, or has it just come to the forefront with regard to the media?
Well, it really goes back to the period after the end of the Cold War, when we no longer had communists as an enemy. You saw a number of neoconservative writers like Samuel Huntington and Bernard Lewis who, explicitly said, we now will have to think of Muslims as the new enemy. And one of the key things about neoconservatives is that they believe that you can't unite a society together unless you have an enemy around which to unite. So they explicitly identify Muslims as the next enemy. And it's really that period when this takes hold. And what's interesting about where we're at now is this kind of current uptick of Islamophobia really gets going around 2010. So it's not a kind of spontaneous reaction to something like 9/11 or indeed San Bernardino. It's actually much more about what was happening in 2010, the coming to the presidency of Obama, and so Islamophobia was massively increased around that time in a systematic campaign to demonize Obama, and that points to the fact that this is as much to do with race as it is to do with religion.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Tell us about your book. How has this worldview of the Muslims are coming come to be so prevalent in America? What's going on here?
Well, in the book, I try and look at the stories that we tell ourselves about terrorism and the stories that we have been telling ourselves about Muslims, most of which are fantasies, and then try and look at what happens when you put those fantasies into the policy-making process and create a system of mass surveillance that's specifically directed at Muslims. Right now, in the United States, we have something like one intelligence agent spying on Muslims for every 66 Muslims living in the United States.
Amazing.
Which is roughly the same ratio that the East Germans were living under the Stasi in the communist system of East Germany. So, and if you've seen the documentaries and the films about that period, you'll understand this is a society where people spy on their own families, where people are asked to inform on their neighbours and so forth. And that's the kind of culture that we're trying to create now. We saw that with the clip of Trump that you played earlier.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to really understand that movie, The Lives of Others, is a great insight into East German life. I'd been in East Germany back when it was East Germany. As I mentioned in my setup, a Donald Trump supporter was arrested yesterday for building a bomb and threatening Muslims. Trump's also been endorsed by David Duke, a former Grand Wizard of the KKK, by Richard Bertrand Spencer, who heads the National Policy Institute and advocates peaceful ethnic cleansing, in quotes, and by William Daniel Johnson, chairman of the American Freedom Party, which, quote, represents the interests and issues of European Americans, end quote. What does that tell us about Trump's rhetoric, and what should it tell us about his supporters?
Well, I think it's probably a mistake to just see this as something that's centered around Trump himself. We have a problem that's much wider than that. A kind of conspiracy theory thinking has taken hold of the Republican Party, actually. Not only Trump, but Carson, Cruz, and Fiorina all met with someone called Frank Gaffney on the night before the Las Vegas primary debate. Frank Gaffney is the head of something called the Center for Security Policy, one of the major outfits that's been putting out Islamophobic propaganda, a fantasist, someone with a systematic campaign to try and demonize Muslims. This is the kind of influence that is now right in the center of the Republican Party, and it's conspiracy theory thinking. It's people who think that the Muslim Brotherhood secretly runs America. It's very similar to the kind of conspiracy theories that used to be directed at Jews 100 years ago, when we would be told by people like Henry Ford in his Dearborn Independent newspaper that Jews were secretly controlling the world. It's exactly this kind of thinking.
And we saw how well that worked out in the 1930s. Dr. Arun Kundnani, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you particularly for your insight into the neocons. It was fascinating.